Leviathan. When the old men of Tirzah spoke of the outer sea, they lowered their voices, not because the sea itself was holy, not because the cliffs above it held temples or altars or graves. They lowered their voices because no one with sense spoke boldly about a thing that had swallowed ships, cracked harbors, and erased whole generations of fishermen as though they had never existed. They called it by many names when children were nearby: the deep king, the coil beneath, the fire in the water, the sleepless one. But when the lamps were low and the storm wind pressed at the shutters, they called it what their fathers had called it, and what their fathers' had feared to call too loudly: Leviathan. Naram had heard the stories all his life. He had heard them while patching nets with his father, heard them while carrying salt fish to market, heard them while standing at the shore at dusk, staring across black waters toward the horizon where the sea and sky fused into one bruise-colored line. He had heard how Leviathan's scales were harder than hammered bronze, how his eyes burned like dawn, how he left shining tracks upon the deep, and how smoke rose from his nostrils when he breached, how harpoons bent against him, how spears splintered, how ships vanished. He had also heard what came after every telling: no man can master him. That part Naram never liked. At 22, he had the broad shoulders of a rower, the scars of a fisherman, and the hot, steady pride of a man who had not yet learned the true size of the world. Tirzah was a hard town wedged between cliffs and sea, where men measured worth by storms survived and burdens carried. Naram had spent his whole life being called strong, brave, reckless sometimes, but in the admiring way old fighters call a younger man foolish because they remember the pleasure of it. So each time he heard that no man could master Leviathan, something inside him rose up in protest. Why not? What creature, however terrible, was beyond courage? What beast, however vast, could not be tracked, trapped, wounded, and brought low by enough cunning? When he was a boy, those questions had earned him smacks on the back of the head. When he became a man, they earned him uneasy silence. Then the sea took his brother. It happened in the second month of the storm season. The sky had been clear when Jadon left the harbor, and the water calm enough to reflect the gulls as they wheeled above. By noon, the wind had shifted. By evening, a broken boat plank washed ashore half a league south of the village. 2 days later, the bodies of 3 crewmen were found in a cove among shattered timbers. Jadon was never found. The elders said storm. The fishermen said undertow. The women whispered the old name. Naram said nothing. But that night he walked alone to the cliffs and stared down at the boiling water below. For the first time in his life, the stories no longer sounded like stories. They sounded like theft. His brother had laughed loudly, eaten quickly, sung off-key, and once punched a tax collector hard enough to knock him backward into a basket of eels. He had been alive, ordinary, irritating, beloved. Then the sea had taken him and given back nothing. Grief hardened into purpose. Within 3 weeks, Naram had made his decision. He would hunt Leviathan. When he first spoke the words aloud, his mother stared at him as if he had begun speaking in the tongue of lunatics. "You will do no such thing." "I will." "You cannot even prove it was Leviathan." "I don't need proof. Something is out there." "Yes," she snapped. "The sea is out there, storms are out there, death is out there. Must you declare war on all of them?" Naram stood in the doorway of their small stone house, jaw tight. If no one fights what is in the deep, it will keep taking. His mother's face changed then, and the anger drained into weariness. "It has always taken," she said softly. "That is the nature of the sea." "Then I will change that." At that she laughed once, a hard, brittle sound that had no mirth in it. "You speak as if the world waits for your permission to remain as it is." He left before she could say more. Word spread quickly. Tirzah was too small for secrecy and too old for novelty. By the following evening, the harbor knew. By the next morning, the whole town knew, including the potter who had never seen open water in 30 years but still felt qualified to discuss the matter at length. Most called Naram mad. A few called him brave. Only one man said he would go with him. Eliab had been a sailor in his youth. though now his beard was silver and his left knee stiff from a break that had healed badly. He lived in a weather-beaten house above the harbor with no wife, no children, and enough old scars to suggest that either wisdom had finally found him too late, or not at all. Narem found him sitting on an overturned barrel, sharpening a knife that did not need sharpening. "You came," Eliab said without looking up. "You knew I would. I knew you would if your pride was stronger than your sense." Narem bristled. "I'm not a boy." "No," Eliab said, "that is why I came." He set the knife aside and finally raised his eyes. They were pale, sea-washed blue, strange against his dark, weathered skin. "You intend to hunt a terror no ship has survived," Eliab said. "So listen carefully. You cannot fight the deep the way you fight a man. You cannot threaten it, shame it, or overpower it. If Leviathan is what the stories say, then he is older than our schemes and stronger than our anger. Then why come?" Eliab's mouth twitched faintly. "Because I am old, and old men make two kinds of choices, wise ones and final ones." Narem could not help a grin at that. By week's end, they had a boat. It was not large. Nothing in Tirzah's harbor was large, not compared with the ocean's appetite. But the vessel, Wayfarer, had been built by Jadon and Narem's father in better years, with cedar ribs and a reinforced keel meant to ride hard waves. Narem patched the sail himself. Eliab inspected every rope, hook, oar, and barrel twice. They loaded harpoons tipped with forged iron, coils of chain, heavy rope treated in pitch, water skins, dried fish, salt meat, oil lamps, spare mast pegs, a gaff hook, 2 curved swords, a net so thick it took 3 men to drag it across the dock. On the morning of departure, the town gathered in uneasy silence. No one cheered. It did not feel like a heroic leaving. It felt like the sort of procession one attends before a burial, when the body is still foolish enough to breathe. Narem's mother stood apart from the others. She did not embrace him. She placed a hand on his cheek briefly, as if testing whether he was fevered. "Come back," she said. He wanted to answer with certainty. He wanted to say, "I will, and I will return with its head dragged behind my ship." He wanted to give her something grand. Instead, for reasons he did not understand, he said only, "I will try." Her eyes glistened, but she stepped away. Eliab limped aboard. "Better words," he murmured. The tide pulled them out. For the first day, the sea was almost gentle. Gulls followed their wake for an hour, then vanished. Tirzah shrank behind them into stone and smoke and memory. By evening, the cliffs were gone, and there was only water in all directions. Narem stood at the bow, drinking in the horizon like a challenge. "There," he said, "that is where men grow small." Eliab, coiling rope nearby, did not look up. Men are always small. The sea merely removes their excuses. They sailed southward, following old tales and newer rumors. A merchant captain from Senior had reported a wake of shining foam 3 days' journey offshore. A whaler claimed he had seen a dark ridge break the sea under moonlight, too large for any known beast. Another vessel had found itself surrounded by boiling water, though the air above remained cold.